Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is making the decision to continue paying attention or to switch to another video. Or maybe you already decided to stay from the moment you read the title. But here's the question that will change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Did you really decide to stay? Or did something deeper, something you can't see or control, already make that decision for you before your conscious mind even realized there was a decision to make? This question isn't abstract philosophy. It's the difference between living as the protagonist of your own life or as a spectator who believes they're directing a movie that was actually already filmed. And the answer is going to destroy some of your most fundamental beliefs about who you are and how your mind really works. Think about the last time you said something you immediately regretted. Those words came out of your mouth before you could stop them, right? Or remember that time when you promised not to check your phone during an important conversation, but your eyes automatically went to the screen when a notification arrived? In that moment, where was your free will? Where was that all-powerful force that supposedly allows you to consciously choose every action? The truth is that we live in an illusion so convincing that science, philosophy, and spirituality have been struggling with it for millennia. It's the illusion that you are the conscious author of your thoughts, the deliberate architect of your decisions, the captain navigating the ship of your mind toward wherever you decide. But neuroscientists have discovered something disturbing. The brain makes decisions up to 10 seconds before your conscious mind realizes there's a decision to make. Imagine for a moment that you're a king who believes he rules his kingdom. But in reality, all the important decrees were already written by invisible advisors operating in the shadows. You simply sign documents that are already drafted, believing you're making sovereign decisions. This is the closest thing to what really happens in your mind every day. Your consciousness is that king, noble and convinced of his power, while unconscious processes you can't perceive are directing the real show. This revelation shouldn't terrify you, though it probably will at first. It should liberate you. Because once you understand the real nature of the human mind, once you see through the illusion of absolute control, you can start working with the real architecture of your being instead of fighting against ghosts. You can stop blaming yourself for not having superhuman willpower and start designing your life in a way that works with your real nature, not against it. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer expressed it with brutal clarity. A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. This phrase contains the entire paradox of free will. You can execute your desires, but you can't consciously choose what those desires will be. They emerge from the depths of your unconscious like bubbles rising to the surface of a lake. You don't create the bubbles. You simply observe them appearing. But here's the first great deception they've sold you, that recognizing the absence of absolute free will means resigning yourself to being a powerless puppet. This is completely false. In fact, it's the opposite. When you stop fighting against the real nature of the mind, when you stop assuming you should be able to control every thought and every impulse with pure willpower, you begin to develop what we could call intelligent free will, not the mythical free will of total control, but the practical free will of wise influence. Consider the difference between a novice gardener who believes they can grow any plant in any soil with enough effort, and an experienced gardener who understands the natural laws of plant growth. The novice will constantly frustrate themselves fighting against nature. The experienced one will work with it, preparing the right soil, planting in the correct season, creating conditions where plants naturally thrive. Your mind works exactly the same way. Most people live in the first state, that of the novice gardener. They believe they should be able to consciously decide to stop procrastinating, stop feeling anxiety, stop having negative thoughts, stop being attracted to people who hurt them. They punish themselves when they can't exercise this mythical control. They blame themselves for not having enough willpower, and they live in a constant internal battle. They can never win because they're fighting against the fundamental laws of how consciousness really works. This battle is exhausting because it's a war against reality itself. It's like trying to control the weather with positive thoughts or attempting to stop aging with pure mental determination. It won't work, and the constant frustration of trying will leave you weaker, not stronger. But there's another path, and this path begins with a deep understanding of what you really are. You're not a dictator of your mind, you're more like an ecosystem. Within you coexist multiple systems, multiple psychological voices, multiple processing centers that operate both consciously and unconsciously. Psychologist Carl Jung called it the collective psyche. Modern neuroscientists call it distributed neural networks. Mystics call it the many selves that inhabit the being. Imagine your mind as an orchestra. There are wind instruments representing your emotions, strings representing your rational thoughts, percussion representing your basic impulses, and many other musicians you can't even clearly identify. For most of your life, you've believed you were the conductor of this orchestra, consciously moving the baton to create the symphony of your existence. But the truth is more subtle and more interesting. You are both the conductor and one of the musicians, and the music emerges from a complex collaboration between all the elements of the system. Sometimes the conscious conductor can influence the melody, but other times the musicians play so loudly that their music completely dominates the conscious intention of the conductor. And here's the key. Instead of fighting against the musicians or pretending they don't exist, the wise conductor learns to listen to them, to understand their patterns, to create arrangements where all elements can contribute to beautiful music instead of cacophonous noise. This understanding leads us to the first pillar of real freedom: awareness of unconscious patterns. You can't change what you can't see, and most of what really directs your behavior operates below the radar of your conscious attention. Your romantic preferences, your irrational fears, your automatic reactions to certain types of people, your self-sabotage patterns. All of this emerges from unconscious programming that formed long before you had the capacity to consciously examine your own mind. But once you begin to observe these patterns without judging them, something extraordinary happens. Conscious observation, without the attempt at immediate control, begins to change the dynamics of the entire system. It's as if you turned on a light in a room that had always been dark. The furniture doesn't immediately change position, but now you can see it, and with time, you can reorganize it more intelligently. Think about the last time you surprised yourself doing something you didn't consciously want to do. Maybe it was compulsively checking social media when you had important work. Or maybe it was reacting with excessive irritation to an innocent comment from someone close to you. In those moments, an unconscious part of you took temporary control, acting according to programmed patterns that operate faster than your capacity for conscious intervention. Traditionally, you would have blamed yourself for this lack of control, but from the new perspective, you can see this episode as valuable information about the internal functioning of your system. That part that took control isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that's trying to satisfy some need, avoid some pain, or protect you from some perceived threat. It may be operating with outdated information or with strategies that are no longer useful, but its fundamental intention is positive. This understanding leads us to the second pillar: internal collaboration instead of internal war. Instead of trying to suppress or control by force the unconscious parts of yourself, you can learn to communicate with them, to understand what they're trying to achieve, and to negotiate internal agreements that work better for the entire system. Imagine you discover that your tendency to procrastinate isn't laziness or lack of discipline, but a protective part of your psyche that's trying to avoid the risk of failing at something important. This part learned at some point in your past that not trying is safer than trying and failing. Now, instead of punishing yourself for procrastinating, you can recognize this legitimate concern and look for ways to create more emotional safety around your important projects. You can break large tasks into smaller steps, celebrate partial progress, or create support systems that reduce the fear of failure. Suddenly, what seemed like a character flaw becomes an opportunity for compassionate growth. What seemed like a failure of free will becomes an invitation to develop deeper psychological wisdom. This approach works because it's aligned with how complex systems actually operate. Your mind isn't a simple machine you can program directly with conscious commands. It's more like a garden or an ecosystem where change happens through creating favorable conditions and removing obstacles, not through brute force. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio discovered something fascinating. People who suffer damage to the emotional areas of the brain but keep their rational capacities intact make terrible decisions in real life. They can solve complex logical problems, but they can't navigate basic social situations or make decisions that actually benefit them long term. This suggests that wise decision-making requires collaboration between conscious and unconscious systems, not the domination of one over the other. Your intuition, your hunches, your automatic emotional reactions all contain important information that your rational mind can't process directly. But they can also be based on outdated information or irrational fears that are no longer relevant to your current situation. The key isn't to ignore these unconscious signals or obey them blindly, but to develop the capacity to dialogue with them intelligently. This leads us to the third pillar: conscious creation of your psychological environment. If you can't directly control your thoughts and impulses, you can design the conditions that influence what types of thoughts and impulses are more likely to emerge. This is what the ancients understood when they spoke of spiritual discipline, what modern psychologists call choice architecture, and what successful entrepreneurs practice when they design systems that make correct behavior automatic. Consider something as simple as organizing your physical space. If you want to read more books, you can try to force yourself to read through pure willpower every day, fighting against your impulses to check your phone or watch television. Or you can remove the television from your room, put your phone in another room when you get home, and place interesting books in visible places where they'll naturally call your attention. The first approach requires a constant battle against your natural impulses. The second works with them, creating conditions where the behavior you desire emerges more naturally. The same principle applies to your social environment. If you want to develop certain aspects of your personality, surrounding yourself with people who already embody those qualities will have a much more powerful effect than trying to change in isolation. If you want to be more optimistic, spending time with genuinely positive people will influence your thought patterns in ways that forced positive thinking never could achieve. If you want to be more disciplined, joining communities where discipline is the cultural norm will make that behavior feel natural instead of forced. But here's the deeper deception you must understand. This entire conversation about influencing your own mind assumes there's a separate and consistent you who is making these strategic decisions. And that assumption, while practically useful, is also an illusion. What we call I is actually a dynamic process, a narrative that your brain constructs, moment to moment, to create a sense of continuity and control that is actually much more fluid than we perceive. The Buddhist philosopher would express it by saying that the self is an empty construction, conventionally useful, but not independently existing. The neuroscientist would describe it as an emergent pattern of distributed neural activity that creates the illusion of a centralized observer. The Jungian psychologist would speak of the ego personality as one of many voices in the psyche, important but not necessarily the main voice. This understanding can be initially destabilizing. If there's no fixed you making decisions, then who's in charge? Who's responsible for the consequences of actions? How can you plan for the future or learn from the past if the one who plans and the one who learns are fluid processes instead of stable entities? But paradoxically, this understanding of the fluid nature of the self can be profoundly liberating. It means you're not trapped in a fixed personality that was determined in your childhood. It means the aspects of yourself you don't like aren't permanent character flaws, but patterns that can evolve. It means the person you were yesterday doesn't have to completely limit the person you can be tomorrow. Imagine that all your life you've believed you were a marble statue, solid and immutable. Every flaw seemed permanent to you. Every limitation seemed written in stone. But now you discover that you're more like water flowing through a riverbed. Your current form is influenced by the terrain you've traveled, but you can change direction, you can find new channels, you can adapt to new landscapes. You're not less real for being fluid. You're simply real in a different and much more flexible way. This fluidity doesn't mean you're completely unstable or that you don't have consistent characteristics. It means you have capacities for adaptation and growth that weren't available when you saw yourself as a fixed entity fighting against immutable external forces. Here's the revelation that changes everything. Free will isn't about direct control, it's about conscious participation in your own becoming. You're not the dictator of your mind, but you're also not a passive victim of forces beyond your influence. You're an active collaborator in the continuous process of your own evolution. This conscious participation has several dimensions. First is the dimension of attention. Although you can't control what thoughts appear in your mind, you can choose which ones to pay attention to and for how long. An anxious thought may appear automatically, but you can decide whether to feed it with more attention or redirect your focus towards something more constructive. This isn't forced suppression of negative thinking. It's the intelligent practice of attention management. The second dimension is interpretation. The events of your life arrive as raw data, but the meaning you extract from them is under your conscious influence. You can see a romantic rejection as evidence of your lack of worth, or you can see it as information about incompatibility and as an opportunity to find someone more suitable for you. You can interpret a professional failure as confirmation of your limitations, or you can see it as valuable feedback in your learning process. This capacity for reinterpretation isn't positive self-deception. It's the intelligent exercise of your power to create meaning. The third dimension is intention. Although your desires and aversions emerge automatically from the unconscious, you can consciously choose which of these impulses you want to cultivate and which you want to let fade through lack of attention. If you notice you have tendencies toward envy, you don't need to fight against this feeling as if it were an enemy. But you also don't need to feed it with thoughts that intensify it. You can recognize it, understand what unmet need it might be signaling, and direct your energy toward more constructive ways of addressing that need. The fourth dimension is the creation of conditions. As we've discussed, although you can't program your mind directly, you can design your internal and external environment in ways that make your preferred mental states more likely. This includes everything from what you eat and when you sleep to what you read and whom you spend time with. The fifth dimension is perhaps the most profound, the capacity to consciously choose your relationship with uncertainty and change. Life is fundamentally unpredictable, and your mind is constantly changing in ways you can't completely control. You can relate to this reality with resistance and anxiety, constantly trying to create more control than is possible. Or you can develop what philosopher Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility, the capacity not just to survive uncertainty, but to thrive through it. This choice of how to relate to the uncontrollable may be the most mature expression of free will. It's not the illusion of being able to determine all outcomes, but the wisdom of being able to consciously choose your internal responses to whatever outcomes life presents. But there's an even deeper level to this understanding. a level that mystical traditions have explored for millennia, but that modern culture rarely addresses directly. It's the possibility that what you experience as you choosing and deciding is actually something much larger, expressing itself through the particular form you call your personality. Think of it this way. Every cell in your body is performing incredibly complex processes that keep your life functioning. These cells aren't under your conscious control, but they're also not separate entities working against your interests. They're expressions of a broader organizational intelligence that operates through them. Similarly, it's possible that your thoughts, decisions, and actions are expressions of a broader intelligence that operates through the particular form you experience as your mind. This perspective doesn't eliminate personal responsibility or turn life into fatalistic determinism. On the contrary, it can generate a sense of participation in something larger than your individual ego, a sense that your life has meaning and purpose, even when you can't see the complete picture from your limited perspective. Imagine you're a musician in a cosmic orchestra so vast you can't hear the entire symphony, only your part and the parts of the musicians closest to you. You can't conduct the complete orchestra, but you can choose to play your part with mastery, sensitivity, and dedication. You can listen carefully to the musical signals from the other instruments and respond in ways that contribute to the beauty of the ensemble. Your individual contribution matters enormously, but it's framed within something much larger than what you can consciously encompass. This perspective can completely transform your relationship with control and responsibility. Instead of the exhausting burden of trying to control outcomes that are beyond your real reach, you can focus on the deeper and more satisfying responsibility of responding with integrity and wisdom to the situations life presents. Instead of constant anxiety about whether you're making the right decisions, you can develop trust in the broader process of which you're part. While fully committing to making your best contribution moment by moment, this doesn't mean passive resignation. It means inspired action that comes from a deeper understanding of your place in the larger order of things. When you stop fighting against the current of reality and begin swimming with it intelligently, you discover you can go much farther with much less effort. The practice of this kind of mature free will requires developing specific qualities. The first is patience. Real changes in deep psychological patterns take time, and the instant gratification mentality of modern culture isn't compatible with this kind of internal work. You need to develop the capacity to plant seeds of conscious intention and trust in the process of organic growth, even when you can't see immediate results. The second quality is self-compassion. When you understand that many of your problematic patterns are unconscious attempts to protect yourself or satisfy legitimate needs, you can approach your own growth with gentleness instead of harsh criticism. This compassion isn't complacency. It's the understanding that real growth happens more easily in an environment of emotional safety than in an environment of constant self-criticism. The third quality is curiosity. Instead of immediately judging your thoughts, emotions, and impulses as good or bad, you can approach them as interesting information about the functioning of your internal system. This curiosity allows you to learn from your internal experiences instead of simply reacting to them. The fourth quality is intelligent discrimination. Not all your impulses and intuitions deserve the same attention or action. Developing the capacity to distinguish between impulses that serve your long-term well-being and impulses that satisfy immediate needs but create later problems is a crucial skill for mature free will. The fifth quality is paradoxical acceptance. You can be completely committed to your growth and personal change while simultaneously completely accepting who you are in this moment. This isn't a contradiction. It's the understanding that acceptance of the present is often the prerequisite for authentic change. Now, let me share with you the final revelation that integrates everything we've explored. The free will you've been seeking all your life isn't found in the place you thought. It's not in the capacity to control every thought that arises in your mind. It's not in the power to determine every outcome of your actions. It's not in the ability to avoid all suffering and create constant pleasure. Real free will is in something much more subtle and much more powerful. It's in the capacity to consciously choose who you want to become through how you respond to what's already happening. You can't control whether anxiety appears, but you can choose how you relate to that anxiety when it appears. You can't guarantee that others will love you as you desire, but you can choose how you love, even in the absence of perfect reciprocity. You can't avoid life presenting challenges, but you can choose whether those challenges make you wiser and more compassionate or more closed and resentful. This is the difference between trying to be the dictator of your experience and consciously choosing to be the artist of your response. The dictator is always frustrated because reality doesn't obey their orders. The artist finds beauty and meaning in whatever material life presents, because they know that mastery isn't in controlling the materials, but in creating something beautiful with them. When you understand this deeply, something extraordinary happens. You stop being at war with yourself. You stop living with the constant tension of trying to be different from what you are, while simultaneously trying to avoid changing in ways that might be uncomfortable. Instead of this exhausting battle, you find a kind of dynamic peace, an active acceptance that allows you to work with the real forces of your psyche instead of fighting against fantasies about how things should be. This peace isn't complacency or resignation. It's the tranquility that comes from being aligned with reality instead of in constant conflict with it. It's the serenity that emerges when you stop spending energy resisting what's already happening and start investing that energy in responding wisely to what's already here. From this place of alignment, your actions become more effective because they're based on a clear understanding of real conditions instead of wishes about how you'd prefer conditions to be. Your relationships become more authentic because you're not constantly trying to control how others perceive you or how they behave toward you. Your work becomes more satisfying because you're focused on your contribution instead of obsessed with outcomes that are beyond your direct control. And here's the beautiful irony of all this. When you stop fighting for the kind of control that was never possible, you discover a kind of power that was always available. It's the power of conscious influence instead of direct control, the power of wise response instead of automatic reaction, the power of collaborative participation in your own evolution instead of solitary struggle against superior forces. This power doesn't come with guarantees that your life will be free of difficulties, but it comes with the promise that you can find meaning, growth, and deep satisfaction regardless of what circumstances life presents. Because your most fundamental freedom doesn't depend on external circumstances. It depends on the quality of consciousness you bring to any circumstance. When you understand this, when you feel it not just as an intellectual idea, but as a lived reality, something relaxes deeply in your system. The tension of trying to be someone different dissolves. The fear of not having enough control calms. The anxiety about the future softens. Not because you've secured specific outcomes, but because you've developed confidence in your capacity to respond consciously to whatever outcomes appear. This is real freedom. Not the freedom to control everything that happens to you, but the freedom to consciously choose who you are in relation to everything that happens to you. Not the freedom to avoid all suffering, but the freedom to transform any suffering into wisdom and compassion. Not the freedom to have all your desires satisfied, but the freedom to find deep satisfaction in the process of living consciously, regardless of which specific desires are or aren't fulfilled. And here's what changes in your daily life when you begin living from this understanding. You stop postponing your happiness until you've fixed all the aspects of yourself you don't like. You stop waiting until you have more control over circumstances to start living fully. You stop conditioning your inner peace on other people behaving as you prefer. You begin to find stability and satisfaction that don't depend on specific external conditions. This doesn't make you passive or detached from outcomes. On the contrary, you can engage more fully in your goals and relationships because you're not constantly distracting yourself with anxiety about control you don't have. You can love more freely because you're not trying to control how you're loved in return. You can create more authentically because you're not obsessed with how your creation will be received. The truth about free will they've hidden from you is that it was never about having absolute power over your internal and external experience. It was always about awakening to the capacity to consciously participate in the continuous unfolding of your own life. It's about realizing that you don't need to be the dictator of your experience to be the conscious co-author of your destiny. When you live from this understanding, you discover that the control you always sought was an unnecessary illusion, and that the power you really needed was available all along. It's the power to be completely present to what's happening now, the power to respond from your highest understanding instead of from your most habitual patterns, the power to consciously choose your relationship with the inevitable uncertainty of existence. This is your real free will. Not perfect, not absolute, but genuine, powerful, and completely yours. And once you claim it, once you stop seeking the control you never had and begin exercising the conscious influence that was always available, your life transforms in a way that no external control could have achieved. Think about this moment right now as you process these ideas. Your mind is making connections you didn't consciously plan. It's relating these concepts to experiences from your own life in ways that are unique to you. It's generating insights and understandings that emerge from the encounter between these words and your specific personal history. You're not controlling this process directly, but you're participating in it consciously. This is the crucial difference. Your brain is literally reorganizing its neural connections in response to these ideas, creating new pathways of thought that didn't exist before you started listening to this message. This isn't happening because you've consciously decided, now I'm going to reorganize my brain. It's happening because you've consciously chosen to expose your mind to new perspectives and remain open to the transformation process that naturally emerges from that exposure. This is a perfect demonstration of real free will in action. You're not programming your mind like it's a computer, but you're consciously creating the conditions for your mind to transform in ways that support your well-being and growth. You're intelligently collaborating with the natural processes of learning and psychological evolution instead of fighting against them. And here's the most beautiful part of all this. Once you understand how this process really works, you can apply it to any area of your life where you desire change or growth. If you want to develop more compassion, you don't need to force yourself to feel compassion in every moment. You can consciously expose your mind to stories, experiences, and perspectives that naturally cultivate compassion. And you can practice paying attention to moments when compassion arises spontaneously instead of ignoring them. If you want to develop more courage, you don't need to force yourself to act courageously in situations where fear is overwhelming. You can start by recognizing and celebrating small acts of courage you already perform naturally. You can gradually expose yourself to challenges that expand your comfort zone without traumatizing you. And you can surround yourself with people who model the kind of courage you admire. If you want to develop more creativity, you don't need to force original ideas to emerge from your mind through pure willpower. You can create conditions that nurture creativity, time for play and exploration, exposure to diverse art and ideas, periods of rest where your mind can make unconscious connections, and an environment where it's safe to experiment and fail. In each case, You're working with the nature of your mind instead of against it. You're using your capacity for conscious influence to create the conditions where the qualities you desire can emerge and strengthen naturally. You're not trying to directly control outcomes, but you're intelligently participating in the processes that generate those outcomes. This understanding also completely transforms your relationship with failure and success. When you understand that you don't have absolute control over outcomes, failure stops being evidence of your personal inadequacy and becomes valuable feedback about the effectiveness of your current approaches. Success stops being something you must desperately cling to and becomes confirmation that you're aligned with processes that work. Processes you can study and replicate in other areas. Imagine the difference between a gardener who personally blames themselves when a plant doesn't grow, and a gardener who uses that information to better understand the plant's needs and soil conditions. The first gardener lives in constant anxiety about their worth as a person based on their plant's growth. The second gardener sees every outcome as useful information in their continuous process of learning to create better conditions for growth. When you apply this perspective to your personal life, the change is profound. A romantic rejection stops being evidence that you're inadequate for love and becomes information about compatibility and perhaps about aspects of yourself you might want to develop. A professional failure stops being confirmation that you don't have what it takes to succeed and becomes clarity about which approaches don't work and what skills you might need to develop. This isn't a superficial positive thinking mentality that ignores the reality of pain and difficulty. It's a mature perspective that can extract real value even from genuinely difficult experiences. Not denying the difficulty, but finding ways for that difficulty to contribute to your growth and wisdom instead of just to your suffering. But here's the challenge. This perspective requires you to abandon one of the deepest addictions of the human mind, the addiction to certainty and control. The human mind has evolved to seek patterns, predict outcomes, and create sensations of control because these capacities were essential for our ancestors' survival. But in the modern world, this same tendency can become a source of constant suffering when applied to aspects of life that are inherently uncertain and uncontrollable. Detoxing from the addiction to control doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. It means developing the capacity to act with total commitment without being rigidly attached to specific outcomes. It means being able to plan for the future without being anxious about whether those plans will manifest exactly as you imagine. It means being able to love deeply without needing guarantees about how that love will be reciprocated. This is perhaps the most sophisticated capacity humans can develop. The ability to be completely committed to action while being completely at peace with uncertainty. Elite athletes know this state when they're in the zone, completely focused on their performance without being tense about the outcome. Artists know it when they're completely absorbed in the creative process without worrying about how their work will be received. Lovers know it in moments of true intimacy when they're completely present with each other without needing anything more from that moment. This state isn't mystical or unattainable. It's simply the natural result of aligning your consciousness with the reality of how life actually works, instead of fighting against that reality based on fantasies about how it should work. When you stop spending energy resisting what's already happening, all that energy becomes available to respond creatively and effectively to what's already happening. And here's what happens when you begin living from this alignment consistently. You develop what we could call ontological confidence. Not confidence that you'll get specific results, but confidence in your capacity to respond appropriately to whatever results appear. Not confidence that life will be easy, but confidence that you can navigate difficulty with grace and integrity. Not confidence that you'll always know what to do, but confidence that you can learn from any mistake and adjust your approach as needed. This ontological confidence is perhaps the most valuable gift of mature free will. It allows you to take appropriate risks without being paralyzed by fear of failure. It allows you to love genuinely without constantly defending yourself against the possibility of loss. It allows you to create authentically without being obsessed with external approval. It allows you to live fully without needing guarantees about what the future holds. But this confidence doesn't develop overnight, and it doesn't develop through positive thinking or superficial affirmations. It develops through repeated practice of exercising your real free will in small, everyday situations. Every time you choose to pay attention consciously instead of being carried away by automatic distractions, you strengthen your capacity for conscious influence. Every time you choose to respond from your highest understanding instead of from your most habitual patterns, you develop more confidence in your conscious navigation capacity. Every time you choose to interpret a difficult experience as an opportunity for growth instead of as evidence of victimization, you expand your capacity to create constructive meaning from any experience. Every time you choose to relate to uncertainty as adventure instead of as threat, you increase your tolerance for the ambiguity that's inherent in human life. These aren't minor or preparatory practices. They are the real practice of mature free will, and like any skill, it becomes more natural and more powerful with conscious and consistent repetition. Now, as we near the end of this journey of understanding, I want you to consider the possibility that everything you've experienced in your life up to this point, all the struggles with control, all the frustration with your limitations, all the moments where you felt like a victim of forces beyond your control, may have been exactly the necessary preparation for understanding and deeply appreciating these truths about real free will. Without direct experience of the limits of direct control, these ideas would be merely conceptual. Without having lived the frustration of trying to force changes that wouldn't come, you couldn't fully appreciate the relief and power of learning to work with natural transformation processes. Without having experienced the anxiety of trying to control how others perceive and treat you, you couldn't completely value the freedom that comes from focusing your attention on your own integrity and response. In a certain sense, all your previous struggle with these issues wasn't an obstacle to finding your real freedom. It was the necessary initiation that prepared you to recognize and value that freedom when you finally encounter it. This perspective can completely transform your relationship with your own past. Instead of seeing your previous mistakes and struggles as wasted time or as evidence of your inadequacy, you can begin to see all of that as the specific education you needed to reach the level of understanding and maturity you're developing now. This doesn't mean romanticizing suffering or suggesting that all pain has an obvious purpose. It means recognizing that you have the capacity to extract wisdom and strength even from experiences that were genuinely difficult, and that this capacity to transform past experience into present wisdom is itself a powerful expression of your real free will. When you look at your life from this perspective, something profound resolves. The internal war between who you are and who you think you should be begins to calm. The anxiety about whether you're living correctly begins to soften. The constant pressure to try to be different from what you are transforms into gentle curiosity about who you're becoming. And from this place of dynamic acceptance, from this space of peace with the process instead of obsession with specific results, your real capacity for growth and contribution expands enormously. Because you're no longer spending most of your energy in internal conflict and resistance to reality. All that energy is now available for creative response, for authentic connection, for meaningful contribution. This is the promise of mature free will. Not the promise of perfect control, but the promise of conscious participation. Not the guarantee that you'll get everything you want, but the guarantee that you can find meaning and satisfaction in the process of living with integrity and openness. Not the security that you'll avoid all difficulty, but the confidence that you can transform any difficulty into wisdom and compassion. And now, as these ideas settle in your consciousness, as your mind makes the unique connections that only your personal history can create, you have an opportunity. You have the opportunity to begin experimenting with this new understanding of free will in your daily life. You don't need to make dramatic changes or make major decisions immediately. You can start simply by noticing the moments when the illusion of absolute control arises, and in those moments, you can experiment with relaxing that need and asking, how can I respond wisely to what's already happening here? You can begin to notice the moments when you find yourself at war with yourself, trying to force different thoughts or feelings. And in those moments, you can experiment with gentle curiosity instead of harsh criticism. You can ask yourself, what is this thought or feeling trying to communicate to me? What need might it be signaling? How can I respond to that need in a wiser way? You can begin to experiment with consciously creating the conditions that support the qualities you want to develop, instead of trying to force those qualities to appear through pure determination. If you want more peace, you can create more spaces of silence in your day. If you want more joy, you can consciously expose your mind to beauty and expressions of celebration. If you want more courage, you can seek stories and examples of people who have lived courageously. Each of these small practices is an exercise of your real free will. Each is a way of consciously participating in your own evolution, instead of passively waiting for change to happen by itself or aggressively fighting against aspects of yourself you can't directly control. And as you experiment with these new ways of relating to yourself and your experience, something beautiful is going to start happening. You're going to start feeling the difference between the exhausting tension of trying to control the uncontrollable and the vital energy of consciously participating in what's already happening. You're going to start experiencing the difference between the anxiety of resisting reality and the curiosity of creatively exploring how to respond to reality. Don't expect perfection in this process. Mature free will isn't a state you reach once and maintain forever. It's a practice you deepen over time, a capacity you gradually develop, a way of living that becomes more natural and more satisfying the more you exercise it. There will be moments when you forget these understandings and return to old patterns of trying to control things you can't control. There will be moments when the illusion of the separate self struggling against the world feels more real than the truth of your participation in a broader process. This is completely normal and isn't evidence of failure. It's simply part of the human process of learning to live from a deeper understanding. What matters isn't perfection, but direction. Every time you remember and reapply these understandings, you strengthen your capacity to live from them. Every time you consciously choose to respond instead of simply react, you develop more confidence in your conscious navigation capacity, and with time, what once required conscious effort becomes more automatic. What once felt like a strange new perspective becomes your natural way of experiencing life. Mature free will becomes not something you do, but something you are when you reach that point. When these understandings have integrated so deeply that you no longer need to consciously remind yourself to apply them, you'll have found something that most people search for their entire lives without finding. You'll have found a way of living that is both completely authentic to your real nature and completely effective for creating a life of meaning and satisfaction. You won't have found the capacity to control all aspects of your experience, but you'll have found something much more valuable: the capacity to extract value, growth, and contribution from any aspect of your experience. You won't have secured that your life will be free of difficulties, but you'll have developed the confidence that you can navigate any difficulty with grace and integrity. This is the gift of real free will. It's not the freedom to avoid the human condition, but the freedom to live it consciously. It's not the capacity to escape the limits of existence, but the wisdom to find infinite creativity within those limits. And now, as you come to the end of this journey of understanding, I invite you to carry these ideas with you not as doctrines you must believe, but as tools you can experiment with and test in your own experience. The truth of these ideas isn't in their conceptual elegance, but in their practical utility for creating more freedom, peace, and effectiveness in your real life. If something you've heard resonates with you, if you recognize the difference between the exhausting struggle of controlling the uncontrollable and the satisfaction of consciously participating in what's already happening, then you have everything you need to begin living from this new understanding. And if you decide to explore this path, if you decide to experiment with mature free will in your own life, perhaps you'll consider sharing what you learn with others who are also struggling with these universal questions. Because one of the most beautiful expressions of real free will is the choice to contribute to others finding their own authentic freedom. The world needs people who have learned to live from this deeper understanding. It needs people who can respond to difficulty with wisdom instead of simply reacting with fear or anger. It needs people who can remain open and curious even in the midst of uncertainty. It needs people who have found ways to extract meaning and purpose from their experiences without needing those experiences to be perfect or completely under their control. Your understanding of these truths, your practice of this more mature free will, isn't just for your own benefit. It's your contribution to the elevation of collective human consciousness. Every moment you choose to respond consciously instead of react automatically, every moment you choose curiosity over judgment, every moment you choose wise participation over rigid control, you're contributing to a world where these capacities are more common and more valued. This is your invitation, not to perfection but to practice, not to certainty but to curiosity, not to absolute control but to conscious participation in the continuing miracle of your own life and its contribution to the world's well-being. The free will you've been seeking has been available all along. Now you know where to find it.